I'm Martine, this is Helen. We work for the Greater London Authority. We try to set up data sharing, infrastructure and specific projects there. And we thought it might be helpful to kind of give you a bit of that perspective, see what the world looks like from where we're sitting, and how we can either help you or learn from you as we try and go through that process. The reason we thought you might be interested in London is because the ecosystem of London for data sharing is really quite unique and quite special. There's a long history, of course, of lots of people using data excellently, but there's also a combination of this tapestry of 33 councils along with an enormous number of centres of excellence, academic, civil society and corporations trying to make a better city altogether. And what that means, there's an awful lot of people trying to do new things all the time, which is great, but presents its challenges when you're trying to put all that in good terms. So what we try to do at the GLA is set up the structures and a bit of data leadership for people. So I report into something called the Data for London Advisory Board, where we've tried to just sample a few of the people who we really want to hear from as we set out that strategy. So that includes the public sector organisations like TfL, it includes pan-London organisations like the NHS, it includes industry. We of course have headquarters of lots of tech companies, people that we really want to learn from, and academic institutions. We of course have places like the Alan Turing Institute and the Open Data Institute, all these kind of organisations that we want to learn from. But what's really important on top of that is that we have Londoners and the public to engage with. And so we also run something called London Data Week, running this year it was 30 events with 50 organisations trying to speak to Londoners about data. And we've learned a lot from that as well on how we set up our projects. So what we want to cover today is a few things that we have found have been really important. And there might be some bits in here that you will find helpful for your next project as well. So the first thing is that we always start with purpose. We always start with outcomes. And that's because we consider data infrastructure. It's just an enabling feature, and we therefore lump it in with things like our efforts on digital connectivity. We lump it in with work that Helen does around utilities and those kinds of energy infrastructure, water infrastructure. And because we are the strategic authority, our aim in this space has been to build our capability to using this stuff more effectively and set up that sort of foundation for people to do it well. But that means solving specific problems. And I'm sure all of you have been in rooms where people say, how do we solve this? Oh, I know, data. That doesn't mean anything, right? And just because you have a massive data lake full of data, we've found doesn't actually solve anything for the city. So what the London Office for Technology Innovation has created is this methodology for actually setting up real projects. And you'll see you have to start on the top left. You don't get to start on the bottom right on data. You have to start on outcomes. And you have to move on to actions, which means when you set up a project, you need to have a specific person in mind who's going to do a specific thing with the data that you're presenting them. And that means that you are baking in collaboration. It means that you're baking in the specific individuals that you're working for as you're setting up your data products. And only after you've actually designed the product according to their needs do you start thinking about information governance. Do you start thinking about the ethics? Do you start thinking about and jumping those barriers rather than trying to jump all those hoops before you've even got a problem to solve. So first thing, I'm a big fan of this. It's not mine, so I can just unapologetically tell you that it's great. And it's that kind of approach underlies quite a few of the specific projects the GLA has delivered. SafeStats is a product that tries to share data, personal data, to help us reduce serious violence. Breathe London is open data that all of you can use about air quality in London. High Streets Data Service was set up in response to COVID to help us understand the health of our high streets and what can we do as a city to improve our high streets. And the infrastructure mapping application, which is part of Helen's team, tries to share infrastructure data to reduce the amount of time that our streets are broken open, which Londoners really appreciate, obviously. Which brings me to the next problem. So say you have an outcome, say you have a problem, How do you then actually go about finding the data, the partners? Because at that point, you haven't actually done that discovery piece that most people are used to doing first. And that's where my specific programme tries to help London, because in the Mayor's Manifesto we announced that we want to harness data and emerging technologies, and specifically in these 3 ways. We want to help discoverability of data, we want to make data sharing more simple and secure, and we want to enable collaboration. And you'll notice that the first step we've made really explicit that discovering data is really important to us, and we know that that's a really big problem in an ecosystem like London where there's an awful lot of walls and an awful lot of organisations that don't tell anyone what they have. And therefore, the first thing we want to release, and we're going to release in a couple months, hopefully you'll be able to join in, is the Data for London Library. And the idea of the Data for London Library is just to make data sets discoverable. And what that means is we leave the data where it is. We don't move it. We just ask for people's metadata and put all of that behind a search engine. Which means that all of the open data that people have been painstakingly working to publish finally will all be in one place, and we know that it's all about London, and so you can look for all the air quality releases all at once. But it also means that you can start sharing metadata for private data, things that people haven't shared openly before, but now people know it exists. And that looks something like this, right? It's not particularly fancy. We're releasing it with NOMIS on it because people use the census an awful lot. The London Data Store, which is obviously an enormous amount of open data that London already publishes, and 2 boroughs, because they have open data and we could use it. Over the course of the next few months, we're going to be opening up and saying who has metadata they want to get out of their own silo and stick it on here. We'll be helping people on board so that come January, there'll be enough on here to really help the analysts and really start to put those things together and create real projects together. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can either get directly in touch with the data store team, which is me, hi. If you think you'll be using it, we are also putting together a user research pool for real sort of testing with people and trying things out once it goes live. But so that will be a couple months from now when we have lots more data on it. So that's all of the prep work. That's all of the foundational work that we do before we embark on a real product and verify that it's a real problem. And then the rubber hits the road. And that's where Helen gets involved.
I'm now going to zoom in to data sharing in the infrastructure space in London and how we at the GLA have enabled this by putting in place appropriate data governance arrangements in the legal, technical and operational domains. So firstly, what is the overall context? London is an extremely congested city, both above and below ground with all of the utilities. And every time there are street works, it causes congestion, delays, frustration to residents, tourists, but also costs the economy hundreds of millions of pounds. It's a very fragmented sector. There are 5 water companies, 2 gas, 2 power, district heating companies, connections providers, telecoms, transport, and 33 London boroughs. It can be hard to know who to talk to and how to coordinate. The Mayor has set the target for London to be a net zero city by 2030. So in light of all of this, the CEOs of all of London's infrastructure companies approached the Mayor through his London Infrastructure Group and said, we think that the GLA can be the right place to convene the infrastructure sector to improve the planning and delivery of London and realise some of these opportunities. And that's what led to the creation of the Infrastructure Coordination Service in 2019. The Infrastructure Coordination Service has 3 main service lines in planning, development and streets that are supported by 2 enabling functions. One, the policy team, and the team that I lead, which is the data and innovation team. And we really try to take a data-driven approach, and we're gathering data not just to inform policy, but to actually change outcomes on the ground to enable delivery for Londoners. How do we do this? So we have developed the IMA, the Infrastructure Mapping Application Toolbox. This is some common data surfaces of infrastructure data that we have gathered from across the sector that we then surface in different platforms. So it could be web maps, it could be dashboards, to help solve different use cases. Our main one is on improving streetworks coordination, so digging up the road once rather than multiple times. But we've got other use cases on local area energy planning, on asset congestion, on helping support asset routing. We're just about to start one on scaling up SUDS delivery and how we can use infrastructure data to identify the best locations for SUDS. So we've got a lot of data that we gather, get a sample of it here. One important point is that our team is not a creator of data. We are just a trusted convener for data across the sector. And we do so using these three enablers, so the legal, the technical, and operational. And I'm going to talk about all three. So, an overview of how we got here. We have been sharing infrastructure data for almost a decade. On the top, you've got all of the new developments, so when we build new functionality or we launch a new platform. But I think the really interesting and difficult bit is actually the supporting processes underneath. So we have done a huge amount of work in getting senior buy-in from the infrastructure providers to dedicate resource to creating, maintaining, and sharing the data. We've done the data discovery to understand what data is out there, what format is it in, what standards are there, do we need to develop some common schemas so we can map all this disparate data in central platforms. We've developed the legal agreements. Crucially, we've actually put in place a team to take forward the findings analysis. So we originally had a small team involved in managing the platform and gathering the data. And then we realized, even once the data's in the platform, we need a team to then take forward that data and turn it into practice and implementation. So that's what led to the Infrastructure Coordination Service. And over this past decade, the IMA has moved from a prototype to a central part of the Infrastructure Coordination Services delivery. Over the past decade of infrastructure data sharing, we found that there are some common questions that people ask when we say, can you share your infrastructure data? Broadly speaking, these fit into three themes: the technical, operational, and legal, but they are all interlinked. So for example, we could be talking to a GIS team and say, can you share your data? And they say, yes, but it's all in different formats, it's not aligned to your schema. Will I have to transform it? We don't have capacity. We've got so many other priorities. Does this commit me to ongoing data provision, which then links to the legal point of our data isn't perfect. Am I going to be held liable for that? So we've had to put in place some building blocks across these three areas to try and mitigate or resolve these challenges. So the first piece we've done is on the legal framework. Our main legal framework is the Infrastructure Mapping Application, NDA. This sets out what data is going to be shared, who can access it, and what it can be used for. It's an accession agreement, which means that we've been able to add parties over time, and it's grown a lot. And once you've signed the NDA, data can be shared freely within that whole NDA community. There's no obligation for data sharing once you sign or for meeting a minimum data standard. We really didn't want the legal agreement to be a blocker to data sharing. And actually what we found is that organisations often sign the NDA and in doing so get access to our private data, and they see all the sensitive data there, see the value of it, and they think, oh, okay, maybe I'm going to now invest in creating my data and sharing it because it can lead to better outcomes. And the final point is that data sharing under the NDA externally is prohibited. So the data is very sensitive, often commercially sensitive, or it relates to critical assets.